I remember the first time I noticed them. It was late, in the corner of a foggy roadside motel, the hum of a flickering neon sign spilling through the cracked blinds. The air smelled faintly of damp wood and old carpet, and every creak of the floorboards felt louder than it should. Outside, the forest pressed close, branches brushing against the windows like skeletal fingers. I had just checked in, exhausted from a long drive, and I could feel something watching. At first, I told myself it was just shadows playing tricks on tired eyes, but the shapes moved in ways that no ordinary shadow should. Pale, faceless, drifting silently, always on the edge of my vision. I tried to ignore the whispers that seemed to drift from the corners of the room, low and hesitant, like someone unsure if they should be heard. The air grew heavier with each passing hour, thick with the smell of cold metal and wet soil, and my heartbeat echoed louder than the buzzing neon outside. I couldn't sleep, though exhaustion tugged at me like a tide. Something in that darkness was learning, watching, waiting, and when I finally closed my eyes, I could feel it standing just beyond the dim glow of the lamp, stretching its shadow across the floor. I never should have opened the door. The fog pressed hard against the glass. Outside, the street lamps flickered in quiet bursts. The air smelled faintly of damp asphalt and old pine. I closed the motel door behind me. The lock clicked hollow. Inside, the pale light pooled on the carpet, uneven and thin. I sat on the edge of the bed. The sheets smelled faintly of bleach and something older. My fingers traced the edge, noticing the rough weave. The window drew my gaze. A thin smear of fog clung to the pane. Something moved just beyond it. A face, half seen, pale. I blinked. It vanished. I told myself it was a fog, the trick of light, my tired eyes playing games. But the feeling lingered. The room felt smaller, my own breathing loud and quiet. I turned slowly toward the window. The curtain fluttered, though no wind stirred. A shadow lingered, then stretched in ways that made no sense. My stomach tightened. Something about the movement unnatural. The angles were wrong, the limbs too long. I froze. The hum of the old heater filled the silence. A soft rustling came from the corner of the room, or maybe from the window itself. I wanted to look away. Every instinct screamed to move, to leave, but my eyes remained fixed, locked. The figure shifted again. Closer, or the same spot? It bent, almost crawling along the curtain, without bending the fabric. I swallowed, slow. The taste of metal filled my mouth. Heartbeats thudded in my ears, each one sharper than the last. The fog thickened outside. Streetlights smeared into weak orbs of yellow. Shadows pooled at the edges of the glass. I realized I was holding my breath. The room seemed to lean in, closer, listening. Every tiny scrape, every whisper of fabric sounded like a footstep. The face returned. Not quite a face, more a suggestion of one. Eyes too dark, mouth too still. It tilted its head, watching me. A slow, impossible movement that made the air heavy. I blinked. It was gone. I convinced myself it had never been real. But then the curtain twitched, softly, deliberately, and the corner of my vision caught a shimmer of movement that should not exist. The room felt colder. My blankets were heavy against my arms. The silence became thick, almost tangible. I stayed on the bed, eyes fixed on the window, fingers gripping the sheet, knuckles white. Minutes stretched like hours. The fog outside swirled, almost beckoning. The street lamp flickered once more, throwing a pale line across the floor. A shadow lingered where the light touched. It trembled slightly, as if breathing. Then nothing. I closed my eyes, tried to will sleep, but the feeling of being watched did not fade. Outside, the fog pressed closer. Inside, the heater hummed low and uneven. The night seemed endless. I stayed awake quietly, listening, waiting, and I knew the figure had not left. It was just patient. The hallway was quiet, too quiet. The night pressed against the thin walls, heavy and damp. It was 3 a.m. The fog outside pressed against the window, faint and cold. Inside, the air smelled faintly of old carpet and waxed wood. Then I heard it, a whisper, soft, almost lost in the hum of the heater. My name. I didn't recognize the voice. It wasn't coming from anywhere I could see. I pressed my ear to the wall. The plaster was cool against my skin. The words, they were syllables I couldn't understand. Rustling followed. Slow, deliberate. Something brushing along the hallway. Closer. I held my breath. The floorboards above creaked. Though I knew I was alone, the whispers grew louder, layered, overlapping. A strange cadence, like they were learning the rhythm of my heartbeat. I traced the wall with my fingers, rough and pitted under my touch. A faint vibration traveled through it, as if the voices themselves had weight. A shadow moved past the edge of my vision, but when I looked, nothing was there. Just a pale light spilling from the hallway lamp, thin and weak. The rustling paused, then began again, closer now. Soft footsteps, or something pretending to be footsteps. I pressed closer, ear to plaster. Caught fragments, my name repeated, broken and uneven, like whispers threading through static, half-formed and impossible to follow. My stomach tightened. The air tasted faintly metallic. My fingers tingled where they touched the wall. The floor above me shifted again. Creaks, sighs, a weight moving where there should be nothing. I wanted to pull away, but curiosity kept me pressed there, listening. The whispers seemed to curve around me, soft threads sliding along the walls. I could feel them brushing my skin, though I saw nothing. A small draft stirred the hallway. The light flickered. For a moment, I thought I saw shapes, shadow shapes, folding into corners. I leaned back. The voices lingered. A faint echo under the hum of the building. The rustling slowed, retreated. Or maybe I just convinced myself it did. The night settled, still heavy, still watching. I stayed pressed against the wall, heart still racing, breath shallow. Outside, fog drifted in slow waves. Inside, the plaster felt warm under my cheek. The whispers had stopped, but I knew they had not gone. They were patient, waiting in the walls. I stepped outside. The cold air hit my face, damp and heavy. The parking lot was gone. Fog pressed in, thick and white, swallowing the asphalt. Streetlights faded into halos, weak and pale. The smell of wet earth drifted from the trees. Shadows moved at the edges, between trunks, curling around low branches. Too dark to name, too still to ignore. A low hum vibrated underfoot, through the soles of my shoes. Slow, deep, resonant. I held my breath. The mist wrapped around me like a shawl. Every movement felt muffled, distant. The shadows shifted, slender, weaving shapes that weren't quite human. They stayed just beyond the light, always watching. I blinked, and they were gone, but the weight of their gaze lingered. The hum under my feet pulsed with my heartbeat. I could smell damp pine, soil, something older metallic. The fog smelled alive. The night felt endless. Every soft rustle of leaves made me flinch. The trees whispered, barely moving. I tried to step forward. Feet sank slightly into the wet asphalt. Each step left a faint cold print behind. The shapes returned, or maybe they never left. Silhouettes weaving between the trunks. Silent, patient, observing. I shivered. The fog clung to my clothes. My skin tingled where it touched. A branch scraped lightly against the ground. Slow, deliberate. The hum shifted, rising slightly, then fading. I froze. The shadows lingered at the edge of my vision. Every blink felt like losing a piece of the world. The forest swallowed the light completely. My heartbeat echoed in the mist. Each inhale was thick with cold, damp air. I stayed in place, silent, listening. The shapes did not move closer. They did not retreat. They simply waited. I turned back to the motel. The glow of a single window pierced the fog. Safe, warm, familiar, but the forest remained alive. The hum still under my feet. The shadows still watching. I took a slow step back. The fog wrapped tighter around me, and I knew they had not forgotten me. The night pressed in. Soft, heavy, patient. I retreated slowly, with their gaze following every step. The room smelled faintly of dust and coal vinyl. Outside, the fog pressed against the glass. I sank into the chair, tried to slow my breathing. The TV flickered. Static, though the cord lay unplugged on the floor. A soft hum seemed to vibrate through the carpet. I leaned closer. Shadows moved across the screen. Motion impossible, yet undeniable. My reflection appeared in the dark glass. It stretched, elongated, twisting in ways my body could not. I could see the room behind me, pale and still. I reached out. Fingers met cold, pulsing glass. The surface seemed alive, breathing beneath my touch. The figure on the screen shifted closer. Its shape was wrong. Limbs bent in angles I could not understand. I pulled back. The reflection snapped back to normal. The figure was gone. The room felt smaller. Air thick, tasting faintly metallic. Every heartbeat echoed like a soft drum. I looked again. Static glimmered. A subtle motion lingering in the corners. The hum under the floor thrummed in time with my pulse. My hand hovered near the glass. I wanted to touch it, to understand, but instinct held me back. The shadows in the room stretched. The window reflected a flicker of movement behind me. A trace of breath brushed my neck. I stayed still. The TV remained dark, yet I could feel it, watching, waiting. Every blink brought tension. The room smelled colder. The chair beneath me seemed heavier, pressing down. I shifted slightly. A whisper of static followed, a faint vibration along my fingertips. The figure had gone, yet its presence lingered. A weight in the air, patient, silent. I exhaled slowly. The fog pressed against the window, soft and steady. The hum beneath the floor settled into silence. I left my hand near the TV, hovering, not touching, but aware. The room waited with me. Time stretched. I did not sleep. I did not move. The figure did not return. Yet the feeling remained. It watched. Always. The hallway smelled faintly of varnish and dust. Outside, fog pressed against the window, soft and cold. The carpet beneath my feet felt thin, almost unreal. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, pacing just beyond my door. Each step echoed too long, too precise. The sound lingered, curling along the walls. I could almost feel the vibrations in my chest. I opened the door. Nothing. The hallway lay empty, pale light pooling on the carpet. I stepped out. The footsteps stopped, a pause heavier than any silence. I moved again. The pacing resumed. Too perfect, too steady. Shadows twisted across the walls. Corners darkened in impossible angles. A faint rustle followed my every step. I held my breath. The air tasted faintly metallic, like distant rain on asphalt. The hallway felt longer than it should, stretching quietly. The footsteps shifted closer, then farther. Always following, always precise, always unseen. I pressed my ear to the wall. The vibrations hummed softly, almost like whispers running through plaster. I stopped. The footsteps did too. Silence became louder than any noise. My hand grazed the banister. Cold wood, smooth and solid. Yet the shadows felt alive, bending toward me. I took a careful step forward. The sound returned, echoed against the walls. Patterned, deliberate, unyielding. I paused again. The hallway waited with me. Every breath, every heartbeat, amplified. I tried to focus on small details. The peeling paint, the faint smell of pine polish. But nothing could anchor me. The footsteps mirrored my motion. Stop when I stopped. Move when I moved. I wanted to turn back. But curiosity rooted me in place. Every shadow shifted just beyond understanding. I stood perfectly still. The corridor stretched on, silent, infinite. The echoes faded, replaced by a heavy, waiting hush. I retreated toward my room. Steps careful, measured. The footsteps ceased entirely once I was safe behind the door. The hallway lay empty again. Shadows settled back into corners. Silence pressed in, thick and patient. I leaned against the door. Breath slow, shallow. The feeling of being watched lingered, patient, unwavering. Outside, the fog pressed closer. Inside, the hallway waited for the next movement. And I knew it would here. Rain streaked the window. A soft patter, steady, rhythmic. The air smelled of wet asphalt and old pine. Then I saw them. Pale faces pressed against the glass. Blank, smooth skin reflecting the streetlight. No eyes, No features beyond the soft curves of skin. Just faces, leaning closer, silent. I blinked, turned away for a moment. When I looked back, they were gone. Wet fingerprints smeared the glass. I hadn't noticed them before. Cold, slick, pressed like soft hands against the pane. Every reflection seemed alive. The window, the mirror, the darkened TV screen. All of them following me as I retreated into the room. The walls seemed closer. The floor felt uneven beneath my feet. The hum of the heater vibrated in my chest. I pressed my palm to the window. Cold and wet, the rain dripped down the sill. A slow, steady pulse. A shadow flickered in the corner of my vision. I turned, heart tightening. Nothing moved, but the weight of their gaze lingered. The streetlight cast pale lines across the carpet. Every line curved strangely. Shadows seemed to twist along them. I leaned back from the glass. Fingers still damp, tingling. The air smelled faintly metallic, sharp. The faces returned for a moment, blank, smooth, impossible, then vanished again, leaving only the wet impressions. The silence pressed in. Heavy, patient, unyielding. Every breath sounded loud, echoing softly along the walls that I stayed near the bed. Eyes fixed on the window. Every reflection following, watching, waiting. The rain slowed, softening. Streetlight flickered weakly. The room felt smaller, colder, heavier. I wrapped my arms around myself. The windows watched. The mirrors watched. Even the shadows seemed aware. Time stretched thick and slow. Each blink revealed empty glass. Then another faint impression left by hands I could not see. I sank into the bed, blankets heavy against my arms. The air still hummed with their presence. Outside, the rain dripped steadily. Inside, the faces lingered in my mind, watching, waiting, patient. The hallway smelled faintly of damp carpet and old varnish. The pale light from the ceiling flickered softly. I thought I had noticed every detail here. Then a door at the end of the hall. I hadn't seen it before. The handle was cold under my fingers. The wood smooth, yet heavy. I hesitated, breath shallow. I opened it. Inside, another room, identical to mine. My belongings sat untouched, the sheets neatly folded. A faint hum vibrated through the floorboards. Something moved in the corner, subtle, uncertain. A shadow flickered along the wall. I stepped back. The floor felt slick with something unseen. My heartbeat thudded, loud in the quiet. I blinked. The movement paused, then resumed, slow, deliberate. The air smelled faintly metallic, cold, pressed against my skin. The pale light seemed heavier here, thicker somehow. I tried to step forward. The shadow pulled back, merging with the walls. I could feel its gaze, patient and watchful. I turned to leave. The door had vanished. The hallway was empty again. Silence hummed like static, a low, unbroken vibration through the floor. Every sound I made felt amplified, hollow. I pressed my hand to the wall. Cold plaster, smooth, unyielding. No trace of a door, no outline, no handle. The room that wasn't there lingered in my mind. Every detail, replayed with impossible clarity. Sheets, desk, the faint movement in the corner. I breathed slowly, trying to ground myself. The hum continued, soft, omnipresent. The hallway stretched empty before me. I stepped back into my own room. Sheets smelled faintly of bleach and rain. Everything seemed unchanged, but I could feel it. The other room, patient, watching, waiting. I leaned against the door, silent, alone, and the static hum continued, steady, impossible, unbroken. The bathroom smelled faintly of damp tile and soap. The light above the mirror flickered, pale and uneven. The air pressed close, heavy and still. The glass fogged, though the shower was cold. No steam, no heat. A breath appeared across the mirror. Slow, deliberate, curving, curling like smoke across the surface. I leaned closer, fingers tracing the edge of the counter, cool and smooth. The faint hum of the room vibrated under my skin. A shadow detached from the corner. It moved across the reflection, not in the room, not in the space I occupied. My pulse quickened. The air tasted metallic, thick, each inhale sharp and deliberate. The shadows stretched, flowing along the mirror, curving impossible angles. The reflection betrayed no source, no beginning. I pressed my palm to the fog glass, cold and slick beneath my fingers. A subtle vibration hummed through the surface. The breath on the mirror seemed to mimic mine. Inhale, exhale, slow, patient, unyielding. The shadow paused, lingering in the corner of the reflection. Eyes, or the suggestion of eyes, watching, not moving yet aware. I stepped back slightly. The hum persisted, faint but insistent. The fog shifted, curling in patterns I could not follow. The room seemed smaller, walls pressing in. The tiles reflected light strangely, folding space along edges. I held my breath. The shadow tilted its head, mimicking me almost perfectly. A ripple across the glass, and the fog thickened again. Time stretched. The mirror seemed endless. Every reflection felt like a room I could not enter. I exhaled slowly. The shadow remained. Patient, waiting. The hum softened. The fog began to fade. The reflection returned to its usual pale self, but the air still felt heavy. Every inhale carried the memory of that movement. Every glance at the glass carried its gaze. I stepped back, letting the door click shut behind me. The bathroom fell silent. Yet the mirror hummed faintly in my mind. I did not return. I did not move closer. The shadow remained patient, impossible, watching. The room smelled faintly of dust and worn sheets. The fog outside pressed against the window, cold and damp. The air inside felt heavy, thick against my skin. Soft rustling came from under the bed. Slow, subtle, almost tentative. I froze, breath shallow, listening. I knelt down. Fingers brushed the carpet, rough, slightly damp. The darkness beneath the bed seemed deeper than it should be. Nothing, just shadows pooling in the corners. Yet the rustling continued, faint and persistent. It grew closer, like someone breathing softly, a rhythm that matched my pulse. I held my head near the floor. The smell of dust, old wood, and something faintly metallic filled my nose. The rustling paused, then resumed, creeping closer, circling. I lay back down slowly. The bed sagged beneath me, sheets cool against my skin, heart hammering, ears straining in the quiet. Soft footsteps traced the edges of the room, barely audible, deliberate, each one echoing slightly, impossible to locate. I pressed my fingers into the sheets, cold, textured, grounding me. But the rustling beneath the bed continued, patient, knowing. I blinked. Shadows shifted along the walls, twisting with the dim light. A faint hum, almost imperceptible, vibrated through the floor. The breathing like rustling drew closer, then retreated, slow, deliberate, teasing. I stayed still. Each heartbeat felt amplified, hollow in the room. Every small sound, the hum of the heater, the fog pressing outside, felt sharper, nearer. The shadows seemed to bend toward the bed. The corners darkened. A trace of something unseen brushed the air near my hand. I exhaled slowly. The rustling circled once more, then faded, leaving only the whisper of soft footsteps against the floor. I lay there, tense still. The bed smelled faintly of my own sweat, warm and reassuring. Yet the memory of the movement lingered. Outside, the fog thickened. Inside, silence hummed like static. And I knew it had not left. Every shadow, every breath, every heartbeat carried the presence. Patient, waiting, unseen. The parking lot was empty. Fog pressed against the asphalt, thick and white. Cold droplets clung to my jacket, damp and heavy. A figure appeared, faint, pale, almost a shadow. It moved through the fog with a smoothness that felt wrong. Not human, not natural, too deliberate, too precise in every motion. I watched, breath shallow. The fog swirled around its legs, curling softly against the light. Each blink brought it closer, though it seemed to drift rather than walk. The trees bent lightly in the wind. Their leaves brushed against each other, whispering. The figure glided between them, silent, patient. I could feel the cold pressing into my skin. The air smelled of wet pine and damp soil. My pulse thrummed in my ears, echoing against the empty lot. It drifted nearer, every movement measured, flowing, Yet when I tried to focus, it blurred against a mist. A soft hum rose underfoot, not coming from the earth, not entirely, more like vibration carried through the fog itself. I blinked again, closer. The edges of the figure sharpened, revealing something impossibly still, almost reflective. The streetlight haloed the fog in pale rings. Its light caught faint contours of the shape. Yet there were no features, no face, no limbs, just form. I exhaled slowly. The figure drifted past a tree, hovering as if suspended. Each moment stretched unnaturally. Time slowed, measured by the fog's pulse. Then I blinked one last time. It was at the edge of the parking lot, unmoving, yet impossibly near. The asphalt beneath my feet felt colder. The hum lingered faintly in the air. Every rustle of leaves sounded exaggerated, tense. I stepped back toward the building. The fog seemed to curl around me, brushing my jacket. The figure did not move. Its presence pressed in, patient and unyielding, watching, waiting, suspended between the trees and the lot. I let the door click shut behind me. The warmth of the building felt thin, insubstantial. The figure remained, etched in memory, in the lingering chill of the fog. Outside, the lot stretched empty, silent, still, patient, and I knew it had not left. The room smelled faintly of old wood and dust. Fog pressed against the windows, soft and heavy. The air felt thick, damp against my skin. The radio crackled, unplugged. Static rippled across its surface. Whispers followed, a language I couldn't understand. Repeating my name, soft, deliberate. Shadows twitched in the corners, synchronized with the static. Slow, precise movements that felt alive. I pressed my fingers into the table. Cold lacquer, smooth and grounding. The hum of the air vibrated faintly under my skin. The whispers grew, faint at first, then persistent, curving through the room, brushing against my ears. The walls felt closer, a subtle pressure, as if the room itself inhaled. The floorboard beneath me seemed to stretch, uneven and hollow. I tried to move, feet against carpet, damp and thick. The room lengthened, expanded, then pressed back. The shadows mirrored the static, twitching, folding impossible angles. Each movement measured, deliberate, patient. I exhaled slowly. The whispers pressed in with each breath, faint metallic scent in the air, sharp and cold. I reached for the radio, unplugged, inert, yet the voices continued, looping my name softly, endlessly. The walls closed and slowly, not violent, not sudden, but patient, subtle, like a fog folding space around me. I pressed my hands to the wall, cold plaster, rough and solid, yet the static seemed to seep through, vibrating the air. The shadows twitched again, synchronized, impossible. The whispers repeated, patient, unyielding. I sank to the floor, knees against cold carpet, breath shallow, heartbeat loud in the silence. The radio crackled one last time. The whispers softened, lingering, a weight pressing the air. The room hummed faintly, static and shadow combined. I stayed there, still. The fog outside pressed closer. The voices lingered in my mind, patient, impossible, watching. The room smelled faintly of damp fabric and old wood. The window pressed cold against the frame. Pale light pooled along the floor, thin and wavering. The curtains fluttered. No wind, just soft, impossible movement. Shapes loomed behind the fabric, waiting, patient, edges blurred, bending in unnatural ways. I froze, heart sinking. The air felt thick, pressing against my chest. One shape leaned forward, elongating, stretching beyond the reach of the light. The movement slow, deliberate, impossible. I swallowed, breath shallow. Fingers brushed the windowsill, cold, smooth. The faint hum of the room pressed softly in my ears. The shadow receded, folding back into the darkness. Yet a faint imprint lingered on the fabric, subtle, heavy. The fluttering continued, almost like breathing, soft and persistent. Every inch of the curtain seemed alive, waiting. I pressed closer, the fabric cold against my cheek. The outline of the shadow distorted, shifting. The room smelled faintly metallic. The pale light caught edges that should not exist. The folds of the curtain curved impossibly, stretching space. I stepped back, The shadow did not return fully, only hinted at presence. The imprint remained soft, patient, a memory in the fabric. Every blink revealed it differently, sometimes elongated, sometimes still. The room held its breath with me. I exhaled slowly. The curtains fluttered again, soft, deliberate, alive. The shadows lingered behind the fabric, patient, watching, waiting for the next shift, the next breath. I turned toward the bed. The air still hummed faintly, carrying the memory of movement. The room felt smaller, heavier, impossible to measure. I leaned against the wall, fingers tracing the cold plaster. The imprint on the curtain remained, faint, stubborn, undeniable. Outside, fog pressed closer to window. Inside, shadows lingered, and I could feel them, patient, impossible, waiting. The hallway smelled faintly of old varnish and damp air. The pale light from the ceiling flickered softly. The carpet pressed cool and rough beneath my fingers. Fingernails scraped the doorframe, slow, deliberate, each scratch echoing faintly, too precise to ignore. The handle jiggled gently. No one outside, just a subtle movement, pressing against the wood. I pressed my back to the wall, cold plaster against my skin, grounding me. The air felt heavier here, thick with expectation. The scratching continued, patient, persistent, curving along the edges of the frame, like it knew I was listening. I imagined faces just beyond the thin wood, eyes pressed close, breath warm against the door, impossible to feel but certain. The faint hum of the building pressed in my ears. Air smelled faintly metallic, sharp. Each heartbeat thudded, loud in the quiet. The handle twitched again, slowly, carefully, pausing between each motion as if testing. I exhaled slowly, letting the tension coil in my chest. The fingernails scraped once more, and then stopped. Silence stretched, heavy, alive. The air seemed to thicken further, pressing closer against my skin. Shadows along the hallway walls seemed to twist, leaning toward the door. I stayed still, fingers pressed into the cool plaster, tracing every imperfection. Breath shallow, every inhale carrying the memory of that movement. The handle remained unmoving. The scratches left no mark. Yet the presence lingered, patient, deliberate, impossible. I let my eyes drift over the hallway. Pale light pulled against the carpet. Shadows folded, soft, almost alive. The air smelled faintly of old wood and dampness. The silence hummed like static, and I knew the faint hands had not truly left. The corridor stretched before me, pale light pooling unevenly. The carpet smelled faintly of damp and old wood. Air pressed cold against my skin, thick and still. I heard a faint sound, rustling, soft footsteps, almost a whisper. I followed it. The hall lengthened. Each step stretched farther than the last. Doors multiplied along the walls, every one identical to mine. Shadows shifted along the floor. Each seemed like a copy of me, bending unnaturally in the light. I blinked. They moved with delay, subtle, wrong. The air thickened. Fog pressed in from the corners, curling around my ankles, cold and damp, smelling faintly metallic. I reached for a door handle, smooth, cool under my fingers. But each door led only to the same endless corridor. Soft footsteps echoed again. Not mine, yet mimicking me, following, patient, precise. The walls pressed closer, not violently, but slowly, subtly. Each inhale carried the weight of space folding around me. I turned a corner. The hall stretched further, doors repeating, shadows doubling. The fog thickened, curling over the carpet, cold against my skin. A soft hum vibrated faintly underfoot. The shadows leaned, bending impossibly along the walls. Each one mirrored my movement with subtle delay. I exhaled slowly. Air tasted faintly of damp plaster and something metallic. Every heartbeat echoed in the lengthening hall. I reached the door, identical to mine. I opened it. The corridor continued, unbroken, endless, patient. The footsteps circled softly, never nearing, never leaving. I stopped. The shadows folded closer, pausing with me. The fog clung to my skin, cold, insistent. I pressed my back against the wall, fingers tracing the rough plaster, grounding me. The hall seemed infinite, bending time with each breath. I exhaled again. The footsteps slowed, then stopped. Yet the fog lingered, curling, patient, impossible. The corridor stretched endlessly ahead. Doors, shadows, fogged, repeating in quiet, deliberate rhythm. And I knew the hall had no end. The hallway smelled faintly of dust and damp carpet. Pale light pooled along the edges of the floor. The air pressed cool and soft against my skin. The carpet hummed faintly, a subtle vibration beneath my shoes, whispering secrets I couldn't quite place. Each footstep echoed strangely. Not mine. Voices curling around the sound, soft, patient. I knelt slowly, fingers brushing the fibers. Cold, slightly damp, holding echoes beneath. I pressed my ear to the floor. Words, almost understandable, curling faintly under the weave. A language half-formed, teasing comprehension. The fog beyond the doorway thickened, soft, curling tendrils pressing into the light. A figure loomed there, still, patient. The whispers under the carpet rose slightly, faint syllables hovering, bending the edges of silence. Each echo seemed to pulse with the room's hum. I traced the carpet with my fingertips. Cool threads, rough under my skin. Every step, every whisper, layered with faint vibration. The figure beyond the door shifted. Impossible, deliberate, smooth. It leaned and straightened, suspended between fog and light. I inhaled slowly. The smell of damp carpet and metallic air pressed against my nose. The hum underfoot pulsed, steady, patient. Soft shadows twisted along the walls, stretching toward the figure, folding toward the light. Every motion measured, echoing my own hesitation. I pressed my back to the wall, fingers tracing cold plaster, grounding me. The whispers in the carpet lingered, patient, impossible. The figure beyond the doorway remained, silent, unmoving, yet impossibly present. The fog wrapped around it, pale and slow. I let my breath settle. The hum beneath my feet softened, fading into the silence. Yet the whispers lingered, threads of language curling in the air. I rose slowly. The carpet hummed faintly underfoot. The figure in the fog remained patient, waiting. The room smelled faintly of damp sheets and old wood. Pale light pressed through the blinds, soft and muted. The air hung heavy, still, almost alive. I woke to it, breathing. Beside me, the bed was empty, yet the weight of presence pressed against the mattress. Cold, deliberate, patient. I reached out slowly, fingers brushing the sheets, and a chill, impossible and firm, pressed back into my hand. Silence stretched, thick and oppressive, curling around the edges of the room. My pulse drummed in quiet rhythm against it. The air smelled faintly metallic. Every inhale carried it sharp, lingering. The sheets felt rough and impossibly cold beneath my fingers. The breathing continued, soft, slow, patient, never moving, never leaving, only present. I turned my head slightly. Shadows pulled along the corners, stretching toward me, edges blurred, folding against the pale light. The pressure against my hand remained, heavy, solid, invisible. Every heartbeat echoed into the stillness. I exhaled slowly. The weight did not lift. The room hummed faintly, almost imperceptible, like static in the distance. Fingers traced the sheets again, cold and damp, pressing against something unseen. A presence patient, waiting, impossible to name. The breathing continued beside me, soft, rhythmic, impossible to locate. Every exhale carried a memory of it, curling in the air. I pressed my back against the headboard. The sheets shifted subtly beneath my hand. The presence lingered, patient, unbroken. The pale light shifted. Shadows deepened, folding into corners. Silence pressed closer, thick, almost tangible. I stayed still. The air tasted faintly metallic, damp. The breathing remained beside me, calm, deliberate, watching. The unseen weight pressed faintly against my hand. Not harmful, not moving, but undeniable, patient, impossible. I exhaled again. The room settled into a quiet hum. The presence lingered, invisible, patient, waiting. The hallway stretched ahead, pale light pooling unevenly along the carpet. Air pressed cool against my skin, faintly damp with the smell of old wood. The lights flickered, soft and irregular, like hesitant breathing. Shadows darted ahead. Not random. They twisted with a flicker, moving faster than light allowed. I stepped forward slowly. The carpet whispered faintly beneath my feet. Each footstep echoed, layered with movement that wasn't mine. A shadow lingered, exactly one step behind, mirroring my motion with perfect, patient precision. I paused, breath caught in my chest. The air tasted faintly metallic, tangling with the hum of the flickering bulbs. The shadow moved when I moved, stopped when I stopped. Every motion measured, deliberate, impossible. The hallway walls pressed closer in the dim light. Shadows stretched and folded along the edges. The air smelled faintly of damp plaster and something older, unplaceable. I exhaled slowly. The flicker pulsed again, irregular, teasing. The shadow stayed one step behind. I continued walking, feet brushing the rough carpet, damp threads pressing faintly against my skin. Each step layered with a whisper of motion, a quiet echo that wasn't mine. The lights flickered faster now. Shadows bent, stretching unnaturally along the walls. The hallway seemed longer, deeper, impossible in its stretch. I paused again. The shadow mirrored me still, patient, silent, impossible to reach. The hum of the lights thrummed faintly through the floor. Carpet fibers pressed against my fingers as I touched the wall. The air clung heavy, cold, insistent. The hallway pulsed with flickering light. Shadows moved just ahead and just behind, layering, folding. I could feel the motion of the shape, patient, tethered to me in impossible timing. I exhaled. The light steadied briefly, pale and soft. The shadow lingered one step behind, watching, waiting, impossible. I moved slowly forward again. The carpet whispered beneath me. The air pressed cold. The shadow patient. The hall stretching endlessly. The hall smelled faintly of damp plaster and old paint. Pale light from the flickering bulbs pooled along the floor. Air pressed cool and heavy against my skin. I stepped closer to the wall, and it moved, or at least it seemed to. A pale face formed briefly in the plaster. Smooth, blank. No eyes, no mouth, but I felt them pressing into my skin. The wall pulsed faintly, subtle, like a heartbeat beneath paint. I reached out, fingertips trembling, cold, rigid, unyielding. The face vanished, yet the sensation lingered, a pressure that hummed faintly in my bones. I stepped back. Carpet whispered underfoot, rough and damp against my toes. The air smelled metallic, tinged with dust and something unplaceable. Another pulse from the wall. I could feel it beneath my hand. When I hovered near, like it was alive, breath caught in my throat. The faint hum resonated through the hall, low, patient, insistent. Shadows pooled and stretched along the edges of the room. I exhaled slowly. The air pressed close, thick and silent. The walls seemed to watch, waiting, pulsing beneath my gaze. I dared another glance. The face flickered again, just at the corner of my vision, blank, smooth, impossible, but undeniably there. Cold seeped through the plaster. Every nerve hummed with attention, tingling beneath the skin. The shadows leaned in closer, folding into the pale light. I moved backward. The hall stretched impossibly, carpet whispering underfoot. The wall pulsed again, faint, deliberate, alive. The face was gone, but the feeling stayed. Eyes pressing, patient, waiting, impossible to shake. I exhaled again, slow and quiet. Fingers traced the wall, rough and cold, trying to anchor myself. The hall remained silent, heavy, thick with presence. Another pulse. The wall breathed faintly, alive beneath the paint. I pressed my hand to it, felt the pressure, impossible and patient. Shadows shifted with the flickering light. The face stayed just at the edge, gone. Then there, I stepped back again, trembling. The hall hummed softly, carpet whispering beneath my weight. The air pressed heavy, metallic, damp. The wall pulsed faintly, patient, impossible. I stood still, eyes on nothing, but feeling everything. The face had vanished, but the presence remained, watching, alive and patient. The air outside was damp, heavy with the scent of wet asphalt and pine. Fog curled low across the parking lot, pale and thick. It moved strangely, closer than it should, brushing my ankles with cold. I paused, The mist wrapped around me, soft and clinging. Shadows stirred just beyond the fog, pale and slow, drifting like smoke. When I took a step forward, they mirrored me, gliding silently, just out of reach, always matching my pace. I stopped. They stopped. The hairs on my arms prickled, damp air clinging to my skin. I could feel their presence in the stillness, patient, unblinking. Each step I took seemed measured, watched, copied. Fog thickened around my knees, damp and heavy. A faint hum vibrated through the soles of my shoes. Shadows floated just beyond the mist, elongated, indistinct, yet undeniably there. I glanced back. Figures drifted between the pale outlines of cars. No faces, no eyes, just movement, smooth and deliberate. When I blinked, they shifted closer. Cold pressed along my neck, unseen fingers brushing through fog. I breathed shallow, each exhale mixing with the mist. It smelled faintly metallic, like rain on rusted metal, wet and sharp. I moved faster. The fog followed, thickening, curling around my legs, tracing my path. The shadows stayed at my sides, gliding, patient, silent. Every step echoed softly against asphalt. Yet behind me, no sound of footfalls, only the shifting fog, moving in tandem. The figures mirrored every motion, a cruel reflection I couldn't escape. I tried to run. Mist pressed against my face, cold and damp. Shadows drifted closer with each hurried step, brushing the edge of my vision. I slowed, heart hammering. The air felt thicker, heavier with something waiting. Every breath tasted faintly metallic, tinged with fear. I glanced at the streetlights. Pale light barely pierced the fog, casting long, uncertain shadows. And within them, the shapes lingered, patient, still, watching, breathing the same cold air as me. I stopped completely. The fog hesitated, curling around my feet like smoke refusing to disperse. The figures paused, mirroring my stillness. Silence stretched, thick and suffocating. I could hear only my own shallow breaths, mingling with the fog's quiet hum, and the feeling of being followed, always, impossibly close, impossible to escape. I took one final step forward. The fog followed, the shadows drifted, and the parking lot seemed endless, waiting, patient, haunted. The room was still. A faint chill pressed against my skin. The air smelled faintly of old wood and damp plaster. Above me, a low hum began, soft at first, almost indistinguishable from my own breath. It swelled slowly, curling through the room, vibrating against my chest. I tilted my head. The ceiling seemed to rise and fall, gently, impossibly, with each inhale and exhale of my own lungs. Shadows pulled along the edges, stretching, trembling, then dissolving. A whisper threaded through the hum. Words I almost caught, names, fragments, gone before I could fully hear. They pressed against my eardrums, teasing, brushing like cold fingertips. The hum thickened, resonating through the floor beneath me. I could feel it in the soles of my feet, a subtle vibration, faint and rhythmic. The air felt heavier, charged, as if the ceiling itself held its breath. Something dark loosened from the corners above. Shadows curved downward, sliding toward me, soft and slow. They vanished just before touching the tips of my fingers. I blinked. The room seemed unchanged, yet every surface quivered with quiet life. A subtle rustle of air whispered through the walls. The hum seemed almost sentient, breathing, waiting. I pressed my hand against the floor. Cold, steady, yet above me. The ceiling pulsed, expanding and contracting as though it were alive. The shadows returned, twisting, dissolving before they could reach me. They left faint impressions in the pale light, a smear of fleeting darkness along the edges of the room. I shivered. The smell of damp plaster intensified, mingling with metallic tang I couldn't place. I lay back, eyes tracing the ceiling's slow, impossible rhythm. The hum shifted to a whisper, soft syllables I couldn't understand, repeating, echoing, lingering like breath on glass. The room seemed to contract with me, the space folding gently inward. Every shadow from above hung just long enough to notice, then slipped away into nothing. I could feel them watching, patient, almost playful, teasing me with proximity. I exhaled slowly. The The hum faded to a low thrum, vibrating softly against the walls. The shadows dissolved entirely, leaving the ceiling pale and still once more. Yet the memory of their fall, the trace of cold fingers, lingered in the air. I sat up. The room smelled faintly of iron and dampness, and the hum had retreated, but the weight remained. A quiet anticipation, like the ceiling remembered its motion, and waited for the next time I breathed. I touched the floor again, feeling the hum's echo linger beneath my fingertips. The shadows were gone. The ceiling was still, and yet I knew it would return, patient, whispering, hovering just above, waiting in the silence. The door groaned before I touched it, a long, low moan that seemed to seep from the wood itself. The air smelled faintly of aged pine and cold metal. I pressed my hand to the handle. It shivered beneath my fingers, as though alive, sensing me. A tremor ran up my arm, settling into my chest. I pushed it open. The corridor stretched impossibly, walls bending like liquid. Shadows spilled from the corners, pooling, stretching, reaching for me. The floorboards hummed underfoot. I could feel the vibrations in the soles of my shoes. Each step made the shadows twitch, flowing like smoke toward the edges of my vision. A low echo rolled along the walls. The air tasted faintly metallic, thick with anticipation. I froze. The shadows paused. Then they lunged again, slow, deliberate, curling around the hallway like dark fingers. I stumbled back, heart hammering, breath shallow. The door was close behind me. I slammed it shut. The wood vibrated violently, trembling under the pressure of something unseen. The handle continued to quiver, subtly, like a heartbeat I could feel, but not see. A faint groan slipped from the frame, soft but urgent. The corridor beyond remained impossibly long, silent now, yet threatening. I pressed my back to the door, feeling the warmth of my own fear radiate. The shadows had receded, leaving only traces of darkness curling along the edges of the warped walls. The air was thick, heavy, pressing against my skin. I ran my fingers over the handle, cold, still moving, as if it remembered the reach of the shadows. A low hum lingered through the door, a vibration that set my teeth on edge. I listened. The corridor breathed quietly, stretching, groaning, patient. The shadows had not left. They waited, just beyond the fragile barrier of wood. I sank to the floor, still pressing against the door. The smell of aged wood and iron lingered heavy in my nose. Every nerve in my body tensed, attuned to the subtle tremors, the quiet breathing of the walls, the hum beneath my fingertips. The door remained closed. The handle pulsed faintly under my touch. I knew if I opened again, the corridor would reach further, the shadows closer, the air heavier. I exhaled slowly, letting my breath mix with the weight pressing in. The hum faded slightly, leaving a faint vibration against the floor, a whisper of the danger still waiting beyond the frame. Silence stretched, thick and suffocating, but for now, the door held. I stayed there listening, feeling the shadows shift just beyond, waiting, patient. The corridor had not ended. It had only paused. The bathroom was quiet. Rain tapped softly against the window. The hum of the pipes filled the empty space with a low, steady vibration. I caught movement behind me, a figure in the mirror, tall, still, its shape blurred at the edges. I turned. Nothing, just the pale light of the room, reflecting back at me. The mirror held a secret the room did not. The figure remained, shifting imperceptibly. A slow, impossible grin stretched across its face. The kind of smile that seems almost polite, almost welcoming, until you feel the weight behind it. My reflection wavered. The edges of my face softened, darkened. My eyes followed the grin I could not control. It grew, inch by inch, curling at the corners, tugging at my own lips. The air smelled faintly of damp stone and cold glass. I breathed shallowly, feeling the cool mist of my own exhale fog the surface. The figure stayed behind that thin barrier of silver, unmoving yet impossibly present. I tried to look away, but the reflection mirrored me, twitching, stretching, bending. Each blink made the grin wider, slower, deliberate. My pulse hammered, echoing in the silence around me. I reached toward the glass. Cold, hard, unyielding. The The surface trembled faintly under my fingertips. I could feel the hum beneath the mirror, vibrating up my arm, a soft resonance that prickled my skin. The figure leaned slightly closer, not forward in the room, but forward in the reflection. Its eyes, blank and pale, held a gaze that followed every twitch of my body. I stepped back, heart hammering, but the reflection advanced, inexorably, smoothly. Shadows pooled around the edges of the room. The light reflected unevenly, throwing my own room into strange, distorted shapes. I could hear the static in my ears, soft but constant, like whispers pressing against the fog of my thoughts. I tried to speak. No words came. The mirror laughed silently, a slow vibration through the glass. The grin remained. My own face, unwilling, began to echo it. I backed away, hands scraping the edge of the sink. The floor was cold, damp from the condensation pooling beneath the tiles. I could smell the sharp tang of wet stone and iron. The figure in the mirror tilted its head, faint, impossible. A curiosity, patient and unnerving. It did not move in the room, yet I felt it in my chest, pressing with weightless insistence. I closed my eyes. When I opened them, the figure had not moved, but my reflection had changed again. A smile I could not erase, a presence I could not escape. The hum beneath the glass lingered, soft, vibrating through the tiles, the walls, the thin bones of the house. The room exhaled with me, breathless, heavy, patient. I stepped back, slowly, hands trembling. The figure did not disappear. The grin stretched, waiting, mirrored in ways I could no longer claim as my own. I sank against the wall. The mirror breathed silently, filled with impossible patience. The reflection watched. I did too, though I felt less myself with each passing second. And the room remained quiet, except for the soft, persistent hum, and the grin that would not fade. The fog had returned, thick, heavy, rolling across the parking lot like slow water. The streetlights bled through it, pale and trembling. I could see shapes moving just beneath its surface, impossible movements crawling, sliding, always at the edge of my vision. When I blinked, nothing, but the feeling remained. A gaze, watching, patient. The air smelled damp and sharp, like wet asphalt and metal. Each breath felt cold, too thin, crawling down my throat. The fog whispered, rustling against my skin. It pressed close, brushing over my arms, brushing over my mind. I stepped forward. Shadowy forms shifted, slender, inhuman, folding into the mist. Fingers of darkness traced the outlines of the fog, touching nothing, yet I felt it everywhere. Every time I paused, they paused. Every movement I made, they mirrored silently. There was no sound except the faint hum of the streetlights and my own heartbeat pounding against the silence. I crouched, peering through the veil of white. A shape darted sideways, too fast, fluid, impossible. My eyes followed, straining, but it vanished before I could see clearly. Only the gaze lingered, a weightless, patient stare that pressed against the back of my neck. The fog shifted with the wind. Cold tendrils wrapped around my ankles, brushing my shoes, sneaking up my legs. I felt the soft pull of static in the air. The shadow moved beneath, under, around me. I could not see it fully, only feel it. I tried to take another step. The ground beneath seemed to tilt, uncertain. Shadows flickered and twisted, writhing just beneath the surface. A figure lingered there. It did not move closer, but I could sense its patience, its impossibility. The silence was heavy, not empty, but full of expectation. Every rustle in the fog, every faint shift of light felt like a heartbeat, or the soft scraping of claws beneath the mist. I blinked. Nothing. The fog lay still, but the gaze persisted, cold, unrelenting, waiting for a moment I could not anticipate. I took a step back. The figures, if they were figures, slid sideways, invisible under the surface of fog, always at the edge, just out of reach, and yet their presence pressed on me. The air smelled of damp stone and faint iron, like blood hidden beneath rain. I could feel the fog brushing against my skin, brushing against my mind. A shiver ran up my spine, slow, deliberate. The mist seemed to hum softly with life. I turned slowly, trying to leave. The The parking lot stretched endlessly. Shadows slid beneath the fog, following my every movement. Every step I took, they echoed beside me, weightless and quiet. I stopped, and so did they. A single pulse of breath, drawn from the air itself, rattled my chest. I could not see them, but I knew. They waited. I stepped back again. The fog thickened, curling around my feet, around the edges of my vision. A sense of cold patience settled in my chest. Not menace. Exactly. Something older, watching, waiting beyond comprehension. I stood there, alone, the fog swirling, the shadows unmoving beneath, and I understood that the gaze would follow me. Always, even when I could not see. The hallway was quiet. Even the hum of the lights seemed softer here. I paused outside the door next to mine. It was slightly ajar, though it felt warmer than the walls, as if breathing beneath my fingertips. I pushed it slowly. The room was empty, completely bare, yet the air it vibrated. A low, insistent hum filled my chest, pressing against my skin. The floorboards glistened faintly in the pale light. I noticed an imprint, soft, fleeting, like something had moved just before I arrived. It lingered, curling across the boards, impossible to ignore. I stepped closer. The smell was faint, damp like old rain on wood. My fingers brushed the doorframe. A shiver ran along my spine. I breathed in. The silence around me felt heavy, almost weighting. A static-like whisper brushed my ears, so faint I wondered if I imagined it. The imprint seemed to twitch, subtly, in the corner of my vision. I stepped back. Every instinct told me to leave, yet I couldn't stop staring. The empty room had weight, presence, something aware. The hum rose, soft and insistent. It matched my heartbeat. Slow, heavy. The walls seemed to stretch slightly, leaning inward, listening. I could almost feel the outline of it, whatever it was, moving in the air. No shadow, no shape, just movement, brushing at the edge of my senses. A pressure against my shoulders, soft, fleeting, like a hand that didn't exist. I crouched, letting my eyes trace the floorboards again. The faint imprint shifted slightly, as if the wood remembered. The grain felt warmer here, alive somehow. The room pulsed quietly, with a rhythm I could not name. I tried to speak, to call it nothing, but my voice stuck in my throat. The hum deepened, pressing against my rib cage. Every step backward seemed louder than the last, echoing faintly despite the emptiness. I reached the doorway again. The air followed me, curling around my ankles, whispering against my skin. I could sense it watching, waiting, and knew I was never meant to see this. The pale light in the room flickered slightly, like the air itself breathed. A faint draft swirled over the imprint. For a moment, it looked as though it might rise, move freely across the floor. But it remained still, patient. I stepped fully into the hallway. The hum lingered, fading only slightly. I didn't turn back. I didn't need to. The door closed softly behind me. The air seemed heavier where it had been. I walked down the hall, feeling the gaze stretch after me, following each step. Every breath reminded me. Some doors are never meant to open. The hallway remained quiet, yet I could still feel the faint hum, echoing in the empty room next door, as if it waited, waiting for the next step. The room was colder than before. The fog clung to the edges of the walls, pale and wet. I could see it creeping under the door, curling around my feet. In the corner, it waited, a shape, still and faceless, watching. I couldn't tell where it began or where it ended. The light from the window was thin. It barely touched the floor, brushing the fog into silver ribbons. The shape remained, unmoving, yet impossible to ignore. I took a breath. It filled the room like smoke. I could taste the dampness, metallic and cold. The air pressed against my skin, heavy with presence. I moved closer. Every step felt slower, heavier, like wading through water. The shape didn't flinch. It didn't breathe, yet I could feel it, watching. The fog swirled between us. It curled around my ankles, rising like fingers. I wanted to speak, to break the silence, but my mouth refused. A soft hum filled the room. It matched the rhythm of my own heartbeat. The shape shifted, ever so slightly, a tilt a lean, an acknowledgement that it knew I was here. I froze. The hum became a vibration through the floorboards. The walls seemed to lean closer, listening, echoing my breaths. Each exhale trembled, drawn into the fog, absorbed by the silence that I watched the corner. My eyes strained to see its edges, its form, its meaning. Nothing changed, yet the air felt denser, heavier, as if the room itself had accepted it. A shadow stretched across the floorboards. It didn't belong to me. It belonged to the shape. It pulsed with the movement of the fog, rhythmic, almost alive. I felt the weight of it pressing in, cold, wet, inescapable. The fog wrapped tighter around my legs, climbing slowly, winding upward. Every movement I tried to make was slowed, resisted, restrained. I realized in that moment that I could not leave. I could not move without it noticing. The shape was patient, eternal, and I was tethered that I sank to the floor. The fog licked my skin. I could smell the damp earth beneath it, smell the decay of something waiting too long. The shape didn't advance. It didn't need to. The room pulsed around us. The walls breathed. The air carried whispers too faint to understand, curling into my ears and into my chest. I listened. The shape remained, silent, faceless, watching. Time shifted. Or maybe I did. Seconds stretched, minutes blended, a haze that held me in place. I felt my own body begin to mimic its stillness, my heartbeat sinking to the fog, to the hum, to the room. I let my hands rest on the floorboards. Cold, damp, alive. The imprint of the fog shifted with my fingers, wrapping around them. The shape didn't move, yet it was closer than ever. I exhaled slowly. The fog seemed to pulse in response. The corner stayed dark. The shape stayed waiting. And I realized I may never leave. Not the room, not the corner, not this silence. The air pressed against my face. The hum grew faint, settling into the bones of the house. I closed my eyes, let the fog wrap around me completely. The shape remained. The room breathed, and I waited